You're standing in a dimly lit cubicle within Rome's notorious Subura district in 44 CE, watching what appears to be the impossible. A woman claiming to be the most powerful empress in the known world allegedly competing in a 24-hour endurance contest that would make even the most experienced courtesans weep with exhaustion. The air reeks of sweat, cheap wine, and the acrid smoke of oil lamps, while the sounds of grunting and moaning echo through paper-thin walls that have witnessed countless transactions, but never anything quite like this supposed spectacle. According to the story that would define her legacy for 2 millennia, Valeria Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius and mother to the future heir of Rome, has disguised herself as a common prostitute to challenge the city's most successful courtesan, Scylla, in a contest to see who can service the most clients in a single night. The tally allegedly reaches 25 men before her exhausted competitor finally surrenders, leaving Messalina victorious, but supposedly still unsatisfied, her imperial appetite for carnal pleasure remaining as boundless as her political ambitions. This is the story that Roman historians would tell about Messalina, but the shocking truth is far more sinister than any sexual scandal could reveal. What we are witnessing is not historical fact, but one of the most successful character assassination campaigns in human history. A carefully orchestrated propaganda operation designed to destroy the reputation of a woman whose real crime was not sexual excess, but political genius that threatened the male establishment of Rome. The 25-man competition, the blonde wigs, the secret brothel visits under the name Lysiska or She-Wolf. All of it was likely fabricated by writers who understood that sexual slander was more effective than factual analysis in neutralizing a female political operator who had outmaneuvered the most powerful men of her generation. The real Messalina never competed with prostitutes because she was too busy competing with senators, generals, and freedmen for control of the Roman Empire, and she was winning. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we are exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The woman who would become history's most scandalous empress was born Valeria Messalina around 17 to 20 CE into the heart of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, her bloodline connecting her directly to Augustus through her great-grandmother Octavia and positioning her as one of the most valuable political assets in the Roman world. When she married her cousin Claudius in 38 CE, she was likely between 13 and 21 years old, while he was a 47-year-old man with a stammer, a limp, and a reputation as the family embarrassment who had survived multiple imperial purges primarily by appearing too physically and mentally defective to threaten anyone. What no one anticipated was that this teenage bride would prove to be a political prodigy whose understanding of power dynamics and strategic manipulation would soon make her the most feared woman in the empire. The transformation began when Caligula was assassinated in 41 CE and the Praetorian Guard found Claudius cowering behind a curtain in the palace, proclaiming him emperor and instantly making Messalina the most powerful woman in the known world at an age when modern women are typically finishing college. Contemporary accounts describe how she immediately began systematically eliminating potential rivals while accumulating wealth and influence through a sophisticated network of relationships that extended throughout the imperial court, the Senate, the military, and even into foreign kingdoms. Her methods were not the random sexual adventures described by hostile historians, but carefully calculated political alliances that used every tool available to a woman in a patriarchal society. The famous story of her competition with the prostitute Scylla first appeared in Pliny the Elder's Natural History, written decades after Messalina's execution when it was politically safe and advantageous to portray the Julio-Claudian dynasty as a collection of monsters and degenerates. Pliny claimed that Messalina challenged Rome's most successful courtesan to see who could service more clients in 24 hours, with the Empress allegedly winning after her 25th encounter while her professional rival collapsed in exhaustion. The account reads more like erotic fiction than historical record, complete with salacious details about stamina, technique, and insatiable appetite that seem designed to titillate male readers rather than document actual events. Modern historians have systematically demolished this story by examining its practical impossibilities and political motivations, pointing out that Roman empresses were constantly surrounded by guards, servants, and attendants whose lives depended on knowing their whereabouts at all times. The idea that Messalina could regularly disappear from the heavily guarded imperial palace to work in brothels without being recognized, reported, or blackmailed by someone who could profit enormously from such information demonstrates the fictional nature of these accounts. The logistics alone make the story absurd, as any attempt to engage in such activities would have required the cooperation of dozens of people, any one of whom could have destroyed her with a single word to the wrong person. The timing and sources of these allegations reveal their true purpose as political propaganda rather than historical documentation, as they appeared in works written during the reigns of Trajan and Hadrian, when the Julio-Claudian dynasty had fallen, and it was advantageous to portray its members as monsters who deserved their fates. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Juvenal were all writing for audiences that wanted to believe the worst about the previous imperial family, and stories about imperial women engaging in prostitution served multiple propaganda purposes. They delegitimized the dynasty, reinforced male anxieties about female sexuality, and provided titillating entertainment disguised as moral instruction. Juvenal's account in his Sixth Satire added even more pornographic details, describing how Messalina would don a blonde wig and work in brothels under the name Lysiska or She-Wolf, with gilded body parts and an insatiable appetite that could not be satisfied by any number of clients. The poet's language is so explicitly sexual and dramatically exaggerated that it reads like fantasy literature rather than historical reporting, complete with imagery designed to shock and arouse rather than inform. His famous phrase, Meretrix Augusta, meaning the imperial whore, became one of the most enduring slanders in history, reducing a complex political figure to a simple sexual caricature. The real Messalina was far more dangerous than any mere sexual scandal could suggest, because her actual accomplishments involved the systematic accumulation and exercise of political power that challenged the fundamental structures of Roman governance. She orchestrated the execution or exile of wealthy Romans whose property she coveted, manipulated her husband's paranoia and physical disabilities to control his decision-making processes, and build a network of political alliances that functioned independently of traditional male authority structures. Her victims included some of Rome's most powerful men, who found themselves outmaneuvered by a woman barely out of adolescence. Valerius Asiaticus, one of the wealthiest and most influential senators in Rome, was destroyed on trumped-up charges primarily because Messalina wanted his magnificent gardens of Lucullus, which he successfully acquired after orchestrating his forced suicide. The process involved a sophisticated campaign of character assassination, false witnesses, and psychological manipulation that demonstrated her mastery of Roman legal and political systems. Asiaticus was given the choice between a humiliating public trial or an honorable death, and Messalina ensured that either option would result in his property falling under imperial control. Her manipulation of Claudius reveals the true sophistication of her political methods, as she exploited his physical disabilities, psychological vulnerabilities, and emotional dependence to maintain control over imperial policy and appointments. Contemporary sources describe how she would present him with pre-written documents when he was tired, distracted, or under the influence of wine, securing his signature on orders that condemned her enemies while appearing to act with full imperial authority. The freedmen who served as Claudius's closest advisors initially cooperated with her schemes because they recognized her intelligence and feared her capacity for revenge. The alleged sexual adventures described by hostile historians were actually strategic political relationships designed to secure loyalty from key figures in the military, senate, and imperial administration. These weren't random affairs driven by lust, but carefully planned alliances that used personal intimacy to create bonds of mutual obligation and shared guilt that would make betrayal impossible. The consul Gaius Silius, the actor Nestor, and numerous other prominent Romans found themselves bound to her through relationships that were simultaneously personal and political, creating a web of influence that extended throughout Roman society. Her systematic cultivation of relationships with Rome's elite demonstrates the sophistication of her political strategy, as she understood that power in the imperial system depended not on formal authority, but on personal connections and mutual dependencies. By creating situations where prominent Romans owed their positions, wealth, or safety to her protection, she built a power base that functioned independently of her husband's authority and could potentially survive his death or removal. This was not the random promiscuity described by her enemies, but a calculated program of political control. The allegations about forcing other noble women to engage in adultery, while their husbands watched, reveal another dimension of her political methods, as she was creating a system of mutual blackmail that ensured the silence and cooperation of entire families. By compelling aristocratic wives to participate in activities that violated traditional Roman moral codes, she made their husbands complicit in behavior that could be punished by death or exile if revealed. This transformed potential enemies into unwilling allies who had no choice but to support her continued dominance. Her treatment of imperial family members demonstrates the ruthless calculation behind her apparent emotional decisions, as she systematically eliminated potential rivals for her children's inheritance while making each removal appear justified by circumstances. Julia Livilla, Claudius's niece, was executed on adultery charges that Messalina almost certainly fabricated, while Seneca the Younger was banished on similar accusations that served to remove an influential intellectual whose loyalty to the imperial family was questionable. Each elimination strengthened her children's position in the succession. The financial dimensions of Messalina's operations were staggering in their scope and sophistication, as she essentially ran a parallel government that extracted wealth from across the empire through a combination of legal confiscations, forced inheritances, and strategic prosecutions. Property seizures generated enormous revenue streams that funded her political network while enriching her personal holdings, creating a self-sustaining system of corruption that could reward supporters and punish enemies. The Gardens of Lucullus became both a symbol of her power and a venue for the elaborate entertainments that cemented relationships with key allies. Her public appearances were carefully choreographed political theater designed to project imperial authority while demonstrating her unique position as both Empress and independent power broker. When she attended gladiatorial games, theatrical performances, or religious ceremonies, her presence served multiple functions. She displayed imperial magnificence, rewarded supporters with prestigious associations, and sent subtle messages about favor and disfavor that could make or break careers. Every gesture was calculated to reinforce her political dominance. The conspiracy that brought about her downfall in 48 CE reveals both the extent of her power and the desperation of those who sought to destroy her before she could eliminate them. Her marriage to Gaius Silius, while Claudius was visiting the port of Ostia, wasn't the impulsive act of a lovesick woman, but a calculated political coup designed to establish a new imperial dynasty with herself as the power behind the throne. The ceremony included traditional Roman marriage rituals and the transfer of imperial property, suggesting that she intended to present Claudius with a fait accompli that would force him to accept the arrangement or face civil war. The freedman Narcissus, who orchestrated Messalina's destruction, was motivated by pure self-preservation rather than loyalty to Claudius, because he recognized that her growing power threatened the existing balance of forces in the imperial court. His dramatic revelation of the Silius marriage was carefully timed to occur when Claudius was isolated and vulnerable, allowing Narcissus to control the flow of information and shape the emperor's response before Messalina could mount a defense or explanation. The speed with which she was condemned and executed suggests a well-planned operation. The execution itself bypassed normal legal procedures to ensure that Messalina never had the opportunity to speak directly with Claudius and potentially reverse his decision through the personal influence she had exercised for 7 years. When soldiers arrived at the gardens of Lucullus, where she had taken refuge with her mother, they found her attempting to compose a letter to her husband. But Narcissus had already given orders that no communication from her should reach the emperor. Her final moments involved trying to stab herself with a sword before a tribune completed the execution. The damnatio memoriae imposed by the Senate after her death was unusually thorough, involving the systematic destruction of inscriptions, statues, and official records that mentioned her name or depicted her image. This wasn't simply punishment for alleged crimes, but a deliberate attempt to erase her from history and prevent future generations from learning about her actual accomplishments as a political operator. The effectiveness of this campaign can be measured by the fact that virtually no contemporary sources favorable to Messalina survive, leaving only hostile accounts written by her enemy supporters. The pornographic fantasies that replaced historical reality served multiple purposes for the male writers who created and perpetuated them, allowing them to simultaneously titillate their audiences while reinforcing patriarchal anxieties about female political power. By transforming a sophisticated political operator into a sex-obsessed nymphomaniac, they eliminated the threat that her example might pose to traditional gender hierarchies while providing entertainment that disguised character assassination as moral instruction. The 25-man competition became the perfect symbol of female excess and corruption. The persistence of these allegations through 2 millennia of historical writing demonstrates the effectiveness of sexual slander as a tool for discrediting powerful women, a technique that would be used against countless female leaders from Cleopatra to and Bullen to modern politicians. The pattern is always the same: reduce complex political actors to simple sexual caricatures, thereby eliminating the need to examine their actual methods, accomplishments, or the reasons why male contemporaries found them so threatening that fictional destruction became necessary. Modern archaeological evidence provides a completely different picture of Messalina's priorities and achievements, as surviving artwork and inscriptions from her reign emphasize her role as mother to the future emperor and patron of religious and cultural activities. Coins minted during her time as Empress stress her fertility and maternal virtues, while cameos and gems show her in traditional Roman poses that emphasize dignity and imperial authority. These contemporary sources, created when she was alive and powerful, bear no resemblance to the pornographic caricature that dominated later historical accounts. The political techniques that Messalina pioneered would be adopted and refined by subsequent empresses who learned from both her successes and her ultimate failure, particularly Agrippina the Younger, who married Claudius after Messalina's execution and used similar methods to secure power for her son Nero. The key difference was that Agrippina was more careful to maintain the appearance of traditional feminine virtue while exercising political authority behind the scenes, avoiding the kind of spectacular gestures that had made Messalina vulnerable to propaganda attacks. The real lesson of Messalina's career lies not in fictional accounts of sexual competitions, but in her demonstration that teenage women could successfully navigate the most dangerous political environment in human history through intelligence, strategic thinking, and ruthless calculation. Her ability to accumulate and exercise power while married to a physically and psychologically vulnerable emperor required skills that would challenge modern political operators, yet she accomplished it while barely out of adolescence and in a society that officially denied women any role in public life. The speed with which she adapted to imperial responsibilities suggests either remarkable natural talent or access to sophisticated political education that prepared her for the challenges of ruling an empire. Her family connections would have provided opportunities to observe experienced political operators, while her position as empress gave her access to the inner workings of imperial administration at the highest levels. The combination of preparation, opportunity, and native ability created conditions that allowed her to maximize her potential in ways that terrified contemporary observers. Her relationship with Claudius reveals complex dynamics that extended far beyond the simple manipulation described in hostile sources, as archaeological evidence suggests genuine collaboration in certain areas of policy and administration. Their joint efforts in expanding citizenship, improving infrastructure, and reforming legal procedures demonstrate a working partnership that benefited both individuals and the empire as a whole. The fact that Claudius was reluctant to order her execution and continued to refer to her as the poor woman, even after learning of her alleged betrayal, suggests emotional bonds that transcended political calculation. The systematic nature of the character assassination that followed her death becomes even more disturbing when considered in the context of Roman attitudes toward powerful women throughout the imperial period. Every empress who exercised significant political authority faced similar allegations of sexual impropriety, from Livia's supposed poisoning campaigns to Agrippina's alleged incest with Nero. The consistency of these accusations suggests a deliberate propaganda strategy designed to discourage female political participation by associating it with moral corruption and social destruction. The economic consequences of Messalina's elimination were substantial and lasting, as her vast wealth and property holdings were redistributed among the political faction that had orchestrated her destruction. The gardens of Lucullus, which she had seized from Valerius Asiaticus, became imperial property and served as a private retreat for subsequent emperors. The precedent established by her confiscation and execution will be used to justify similar actions against other wealthy Romans whose property the imperial court coveted. Her children's fate after her execution reveals the incomplete nature of the victory achieved by her enemies, as neither Britannicus nor Claudia Octavia could be eliminated without obvious political motivation. Britannicus survived until his suspicious death during Nero's reign, while Octavia lived long enough to marry Nero before being executed on charges that echoed the accusations made against her mother. The pattern suggests that Messalina's destruction was part of a larger struggle for imperial succession that continued for generations. The transformation of her historical reputation from accomplished political operator to sexual caricature represents one of the most successful propaganda campaigns in ancient history, effectively erasing a complex and threatening woman from serious historical consideration for nearly 2,000 years. Only in recent decades have scholars begun to deconstruct the fictional elements of her story and attempt to recover the reality of her political career, revealing a figure whose actual accomplishments were far more impressive than any sexual scandal could suggest. As we return to that supposed scene in the Subura brothel, where we first encountered the Empress competing in her alleged sexual marathon, we can now understand it as pure fiction designed to serve the political needs of the men who created and perpetuated the story. The real Messalina never competed with prostitutes in endurance contests because she was too busy outcompeting the most powerful men in Rome for control of an empire. Her victory wasn't measured in the number of clients she allegedly serviced, but in the number of senators she eliminated, the wealth she accumulated, and the fear she inspired in male contemporaries who recognized her as a more effective operator than themselves. The 25-man competition was a masterstroke of character assassination that transformed a political genius into a pornographic fantasy, ensuring that future generations would remember her as a nymphomaniac rather than the teenage prodigy who had seized control of the Roman Empire through intelligence and strategic manipulation that exceeded the capabilities of men 3 times her age. When we strip away the lurid fiction created by her enemies, what remains is the story of a woman whose real crime was proving that female political intelligence could dominate the most sophisticated and ruthless system of government in the ancient world. A lesson so dangerous that it had to be buried beneath layers of sexual fantasy that continue to distort our understanding of one of history's most accomplished and feared political operators.